So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about how difficult it is to get things made in the United States from a cost perspective. And I figure I'm probably going to make kind of everybody a little frustrated or upset in this video because there's going to be people on one side that probably, I don't know, call me racist or something because I'm going to point out how and why a lot of stuff coming out of like China is going to be very low quality. And on the other hand, I'm going to make people really upset when I point out that it's very hard to not just make things in China. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about PCB manufacturing because I've been looking at getting something made, and I've been getting some price quotes on getting these PCBs both etched and assembled in the United States or Europe. And compared to what I can do in China, it's mind-boggling the difference. And so I thought I would show you that. So I thought that maybe in the context of discussions recently about tariffs and trade wars, you might get something out of this just to keep in the back of your mind about why things are the way they are. So this PCB on screen, designed in KiCad. Now, this is not the world's most difficult PCB to make. It's actually quite small. If you get the real sense of scale on this thing, you're looking at something that's less than 2.5 inches wide and less than 1.5 inches tall here. It's got 15 unique components and it requires about 37 component placements. I can actually, here you can see it is 55.3 millimeters wide. It is 35.6 millimeters tall. Again, so it's got like 36 SMD placements and like 15 unique parts. Now, as far as the difficulty of manufacturing PCBs, again, this is not the world's most difficult. This is only a 2-layer design. All the parts are on one side. Everything is SMD. There's no through hole. And if you're not familiar with how PCBs are made, it's actually more expensive to use through hole components. Everything here is SMD. The only tricky piece is actually this display connector here. That is a 0.5 millimeter pin spacing. That's more tricky than everything else, but I'm using 0603 components for all of the small stuff. This really not that difficult. Nowhere near as complicated as stuff that requires impedance controlled traces or BGA components, like, I mean, stuff that you would see on a computer board. Again, 2 layers, it's not multi-layer crazy stuff. It's just a pretty basic board. So one of the tools that's available that you can use out there is a thing called PCBShopper, and this is really for hobbyists. It's for low volume stuff. And I'm just going to show you kind of what the quotes come in based on this thing are. So let me switch this thing over to millimeters. And again, my dimensions 55.3, 35.6, 2 layers. Let's do 25 just to get like a small run, production run quoted. Least expensive color, silk screen top and bottom. We want the cheapest lead-free finish. Board thickness, I actually do need this thing to be thinner, but since 1.6 millimeters is pretty standard, let's just leave that to see what quotes we can get. All this stuff seems pretty easy. I don't need any gold. I don't need fancy pin spacing or anything. There's only one design, no stencil. I mean, we can push this thing out. Boards arrive in 30 days because, again, this is not urgent. Get prices. All right, so it's pulled in a bunch of stuff, and I'm gonna skip through the Chinese manufacturers because I am looking at, hey, can I get this thing made in the US or in Europe? Again, just because of current conditions and environment. So if I scroll down, because obviously it's gonna be more expensive to get things manufactured here versus overseas, you see some things start to be mentioned that you'll hear about online. So like Eisler in Germany, you've got Euro Circuits and OSH Park, and there's one in Canada. You've also got a quick turn PCB house out of South Korea. So that's kind of what you're looking at. Let's actually do real quotes though. This is just PCBShopper. All right, so we're on OSH Park, and they are known for their like purple PCBs. I believe what they do is they do kind of off-demand runs. So I don't know that they do things in-house, but I think basically they're like a subcontractor. All right, so it's pulling in my design, and it's nice and friendly. You just drop in your KiCad files, your Gerber files and everything, and it's going to automatically process that and tell you, hey, here is the board. So here you can see it's got both. I do need to give it an email address, so all right, so here we are. Here's the board. Here's all the drills. Everything's come in. Okay, so for 3 boards, it's about $5 a piece. Let's do 25. Again, roughly $5 a board, but you can do a medium run, and this will give me a big volume discount. So if I do a count of 30, and I can't order this because it says my boards are too small. So I need to add another 10%. So let's go to like 35. Okay, so if I order 35 boards, I can get them for $121.60. And that's $3 per PCB, and right now, that's not too bad. I would do that, right? I would totally pay $3 per PCB, but there's a problem here. And again, if you're a PCB person, this is not the full assembled PCB. This is just the board itself. OSH Park does not do assembly. So if we go into services, you'll see they really only produce the board. So unless you're kind of able to either find somebody else to do your assembly, which is actually placing and soldering the components, or you're willing to do that yourself, which I am not, this is actually not an option. So it's cheap. I will give it, the price is not terrible. Now, we haven't looked at Chinese manufacturing yet, but I would be willing to pay $3 per board plus assembly if assembly can be found reasonably. But let's go look at some alternatives so you can get a sense of what assembly costs. Okay, so here we are on PCB Unlimited. So this is another supplier for USA-made kind of quick turn or prototype PCBs. Again, more focused on hobbyists or low end, I would say. So let's do a quote. Okay, we're going to do a quote here for 25. Again, standard board thickness, nothing fancy. So here we have to do inches. Let's do something like 2.3 by 1.4. It's approximate. It's not going to be that important right now. Both sides, both sides. Okay, everything looks good. Don't need certifications or dates. So here we go. And for 25 boards, $20. Now, this is not the total. That is per board. The total, $483. And again, this is just the board. If we look at assembly, again, 25. So unique parts, 15. Let's say 36 placements. Lead-free, yes. Double-sided, no. Okay, quote. Okay, this would cost an additional $18.60 per board. So almost $1,000 for 25 PCBs, and we have not paid for the parts yet, right? We still have to pay for components. So we are up to $38 per board, no components, still have to pay components, still have to pay for shipping. Whew. That's steep. Now they also have Taiwan, made in Taiwan. Maybe that's fine. Maybe you're okay with that. So let's do, again, get a little quote, 25, blah, blah, blah. So let's do 2.3, 1.4, no lead. And yep, $19 a board. Assembly, another $18.60. So you're looking at, again, the better part of $9.50. Make it in Taiwan, exact same price as making it in the United States, close to $1,000. Let's see if we can find something cheaper. So let's try Euro circuits. Okay, so based on what they're telling us over here, it's $140 for the PCBs, which isn't crazy. That's like, you know, under $6 per PCB. Again, depending on what assembly costs, maybe that's fine. And this is where we find out if I go up to PCBA Visualizer, which is where we would look at how the assembly would work. They do not offer assembly to people in the US, so I can't use them. This is just for the PCB, and again, OSH Park would be cheaper for these PCBs. So once again, let's go find somebody else. So Eisler is another European manufacturer. They're in Germany. I do like their website. It is pretty easy to use. Okay, so to have the boards built is 52 euros, so that's not bad at all. That's under $3 per board for the boards themselves. PCBs, pretty competitive. So let's look at the assembly. And here they're not able to give me a quote. I've worked with this back and forth, and they have a calculator here. I can't show you because, again, I've done this on a different computer, but whenever I put in the bill of materials, they quoted me like $15 per board for the components themselves, which is pretty expensive. And the reason I say it's pretty expensive is because I've went out to DigiKey and actually manually pulled what it would cost to order the parts myself. And the answer is under 250 bucks. So Eisler is charging me an extra 50% off what ordering the parts myself would cost. And that's still not assembly. So let me go do assembly. And for assembly, again, there's no quote. I can look at the calculator though, and it gives me a way to figure it out. Assembly costs another 16.5 euro per board. So $400 for assembly, plus they want another $350 for the parts. Yeah, you're all of a sudden you're up $800-900 to get this built for just 25 boards. So again, you're looking at $30-40 per PCB in a finished state. Just to give you, again, this is Germany. In the US, it's roughly the same cost is what I'm finding. Now, there are a lot of other PCB assembly houses out there in the United States, and I haven't gotten quotes from anybody else. A lot of them, you have to sign up for an account before they'll even give you pricing. It's also kind of a pain to get quotes from multiple places because with your bill of materials, you have to be very careful to specify everything, and everybody wants it maybe sometimes slightly different. I will also say that the US-based websites are often not very easy to use because I think they aren't really set up to do internet quotes as easily. They are more focused on working with a customer where the customer provides them with a lot of the details like individually and they talk to people, which, you know, it's a high value service is mostly what they're focused on. Let's look at how it is to work with China on PCB manufacturing. Now, if you've been on YouTube and watched electronics channels, you've probably heard of JLCPCB, right? PCBWay sponsors a lot of videos. JLCPCB sponsors a lot of videos. So let's just see what they've got. I'll drop in my Gerbers. So I've dropped in my Gerber files, so it's processing. And again, I want you to see how easy this is. I literally outputted files from KiCad, plopped them into their website, and here we go. All right, so there's the PCB. I want double-sided. I'm going to change the quantity to 25. All right, we want panelized by JLCPCB. Don't think it really matters. We'll just do single PCB for now. Lead-free, just basic, no marks, no fancy. We do want assembly. Assembly side, top side, 25, tooling holes, they can handle all that. Part selection, I am gonna do the parts, so I've got a bill of materials already made. I did order the prototypes from them. Okay, I agree. Okay, so again, look at their interface, right? They show you, hey, here's the board. You can look at both sides, you can inspect it closely to see like how well it matches what you were expecting. Let's add the bill of materials. All right, so next up, placements file. Okay, so we've uploaded the positions process. Okay, so again, I have already done the bill of materials so that it finds all the parts. So it's got 28 total parts, 14 individual. They actually pull in 3D models of everything because I did use parts out of their parts library, and you can demo, hey, here's what the actual board will look like. And this is also for orientation so that you can check certain parts have polarity or they oriented correctly, and you can change the rotation on any parts if you need. So like on this little transistor, if it were misaligned somehow, then I could fix that. All right, so here's the quote, $91.50. That is not for the PCBs. That is not for the parts. That is not for assembly. That's for everything. Etching the PCBs, getting the parts, and assembly costs $91.50. It is 1/10 of the cost, and it's easier to do. So let me show you what the breakdown is. The PCBs, $9. 25 PCBs for $9. Remember, at the other places, it's $3 per board, $2 to $3 per board. The actual assembly cost is unbelievably cheap. Again, in the United States, in Taiwan, and in Europe, I was going to have to pay $300-400 for assembly. Through JLCPCB, assembly is not $82.40. That includes $53 for parts. The assembly service is $30. It is less than 10% the cost to have it done in the United States, Europe, or Taiwan. The parts cost $53. Okay? DigiKey, it's going to be close to $230 to $250 for the parts. Through JLCPCB, $53. It's unbelievable how much cheaper it is. Now, maybe I did have slightly higher quality parts from DigiKey, and maybe I could shave $50 off of those costs by min-maxing individual part selection. I'll talk a little bit more about why. Again, we haven't gotten into why stuff is both not just inexpensive, but lower quality coming out of China. I'll talk about that in just a moment, but I just really wanted to hammer home, it is so much cheaper. All right, so this is the difference between me being able to sell this board for $20 versus having to price it at $50 to $75, right? Because we haven't talked about shipping, we haven't talked about overheads and handling the product and packaging and time doing customer service and emails. No. Just the raw cost, you're looking at 1/10 to 1/5, right? It just costs 80 to 90% less to do your stuff, your PCBs in China. It's just just cheap. It's just unbelievably inexpensive. And oh, by the way, if I choose the most expensive shipping possible so that I would actually have these PCBs within probably a week, it costs me $120 after shipping to have, from order to having these things in my hand, probably a week. So next up, now it's time to address why are things not just inexpensive, but also, if I wanted, I could make this a very high quality board and it wouldn't actually cost that much. And we doubled the price, right? We got it up to $266, right? That's what we've managed to accomplish. And again, I did stuff with this board that doesn't make any sense. Again, I got gold plated. I think I added edge plating when I don't think that's possible on this particular board. Again, it's phenomenal how cheap it is. So here's why, though, people aren't probably going to do this. If you look at stuff that costs this little, right, where, once you get your price of your product and it's $5 maybe for a PCB, right? So if we go back, and I look at the actual stuff that I'm using, I'm using a lot of JLC PCBs, cheaper stuff, right? Because, well, I don't need it necessarily to be better than this. And at this cost level, it starts to make sense to pick stuff that's quite a bit cheaper. And that may not seem like much, but like whenever you start looking at this row right here, where this connector is for the display, this is a cheap Chinese part. And that part, if I get the really cheap Chinese version, costs 10 to 15 cents. To use a really nice named manufacturer like Amphenol or something for that part would change that cost from maybe 15 cents to like 40 cents, maybe even 80 cents per part. So it would be 4 or 5 times more expensive. And in that scenario where if I'm making this in the United States and the cost of this board is already going to be $20 to $25, adding an extra 25 cents to the cost of the board is basically, it doesn't really matter. And given the price you're going to have to charge the customer for this thing, where you're going to have to charge somebody $25, $30 on top of the board cost. So you're looking at a board now that you're going to have to sell for $75 to $100 because, well, it cost me $25, $30 to have this thing made. The extra couple bucks on nice components, the premium parts, it's just really not that big a deal. So why wouldn't you do that? Because you're probably already advertising the quality of made in USA. So trying to skimp on capacitors and shaving a few cents here and there off of your little parts doesn't really make that much difference. I mean, the big cost of this particular board that I'm working on is the ADC. To get my ADCs from JLCPCB costs less than $2 a pop. To order them from DigiKey costs like $6. Well, again, at this point, what money am I saving and where? Once I'm up to a board that costs $35, $36, an extra dollar or two on an ADC is not that big a deal. If I'm ordering a board that costs under $5, all of a sudden an extra dollar or two on that ADC means that I have to charge quite a bit more percentage-wise for the product. And so this is part of the reason why I think a lot of stuff that's made in China is so crappy. It's not because they can't make it better, it's because once something gets that cheap, shaving pennies off becomes real margin on the product. Whereas whenever you're making stuff that's already so much more expensive as its lowest cost form, now all of a sudden, well, you know, I mean, why not just go for the nicer thing? Because marginally, it's not that big of an impact. I think this is kind of the point of the video. I would love to make this thing in the United States. I would love to make it in Europe. I'd love to, even Taiwan, I'd be okay with. I've even looked at, there's a PCB manufacturer in India because, again, we haven't hit tariffs there yet. But the reality is tariffs just don't matter. The difference in cost is so huge that if I make this thing in the United States, if I make this thing in Europe, nobody will buy it because I will have to charge so much more money to get the thing made that the cost impact is all of a sudden this is no longer a product that I can make. Nobody's going to buy this thing if I make this thing in the United States, even though I'd like to. Even though I would love to make it in Europe, I would love to make it somewhere that's not China because there's a lot of people who I think would love to buy that. They would love to buy this thing at $20 to $30 made in the United States. But I can't because it costs that much just to get the stuff, right? I mean, if I buy the parts from DigiKey, it costs me more than getting it made and assembled and shipped from China. I mean, think about that. It costs me twice as much for the components in the United States as it does to have them made into a PCB, assembled and shipped to me out of China. Twice as much. Anyway, I know this might be a weird video, but you got to think of the economics here. There's a reason why everything gets made in Shenzhen. I've talked about this a little bit in the past in my video on 3D printer manufacturing and why Prusa has such a hard time competing. You can't compete with it. Not on the manufacturing side. So things that are made in the United States, electronics, man, it is rare. It's real hard. You see a lot of companies, they have to move their assembly in-house. Now, let me whine a little bit. I do think we are getting gouged on assembly. If you notice, I mentioned the PCBs by themselves are not the expensive piece. And to me, I would think that's where a lot of it would be because of, you know, if anybody tells you it's the EPA and it's the environmental regulations, well, the really environmental costly part of PCBs is the etching because of that process, plating and etching and all the chemicals and the photoresists and stuff like that. That's all in the PCB manufacturer. But like I said, OSH Park can get me boards for $3 a piece. Eisler can get me boards for $3 a piece. So why is the total cost so much more? It's because of assembly. Eisler's assembly, you're looking at this calculator, watch what happens whenever I reduce the component. 35? Look, 1660. And in the early stages, whenever you're going from one component to two, it's a huge price difference. They're charging at the early stages 70 cents per placement. All right, even if you're using the same component, right? If I do one component but more placements, the cost just kind of skyrockets, right? I mean, you're adding quite a bit to the board every placement. And what's frustrating to me about this is that the way SMT placement works, if you have the same component, once you load the part into the feeder, it's actually a machine that does the placement. I don't know. It's weird to me that the assembly costs so much. Now, there is labor in the loading the feeders, so if you have more individual components, that makes sense. Like if I go from one distinct component to 5, I don't know, and maybe I'm not using the calculator correctly, but these distinct components don't change anything. If I go to 10 distinct components, it doesn't impact the price. They're pricing based on the placements, it seems, and that's bonkers. I would almost understand the distinct components because that's a different feeder somebody has to load. And even JLCPCB, it costs more to use unique components that aren't standard because they have to pay somebody to actually load that feeder in. But this just doesn't make any sense. So if I could get my stuff assembled cheaper, I would still pay more. Like if the price to get these PCBs was under $10 versus, you know, I mean, you're looking at $2 or $3 from China. If it were just 3 or 4 more times expensive, I'd do it. I would do that. But it's not. It's like 10. So anyway, I should probably finish this up. I know I've been ranting for a long, long time. But yeah, it's real hard to get stuff made here in the United States. It's also hard to get stuff made in Europe. Electronics, it's going to come from Asia, and there's a reason why. Unless there's a defense contract reason, unless it's an ITAR restricted part, you know, it just, unless your clientele is willing to pay a lot for that product, it's just not going to happen. So anyway, love to hear your comments on that. As always, I appreciate your time.